Welcome! Let's go through what I found to be the best custom loadouts to be using in Warzone, both by logically trying to consider all the options for different attachments and perks, and also through personal experience. I think I'll have some interesting attachment ideas you haven't considered. The custom loadout is honestly the most important thing in the game. With the right setup, you have a major advantage over anyone using a subpar loadout or the crappy default stuff on the ground. By pooling together your team's cash, you can very easily buy a loadout crate right off the bat and set yourself up for success, a bit too easily in fact, making looting a little pointless and stale when everyone has the same perfect loadout. You could view there being less RNG as an upside too, but very possible they end up making some balance changes to address that being too easy. Even so, loadouts will still be very prevalent, I'm sure, so it's important you have a good one. I'm going to use this loadout as a starting point, but I'll go over other weapon options. No doubt the comments will turn into a discussion. You may agree or disagree with certain things I think are most valuable to have. There is no one perfect answer. I'm starting with this because the key parts of it are all unlocked at low levels, so for you free-to-play Warzone players out there, you can build this after only a few matches. The attachments are a different story. If you don't have everything, don't worry about it. Just use whatever you have access to and be picking up those contracts to be getting big weapon XP bonuses. That'll be a major help along with getting kills. For choosing a main weapon, it's hard to go wrong with the trusty M4. Very strong, very accurate, easy to use. Alternatively, the Ram 7, if you have it, performs very similarly, statistically a little better in several ways. For whatever reason, I still have a better feel for the M4, but if you have both, then you should know what your preference is. The Grau is another viable DLC gun. You're just trading a bit more close range time to kill to be even more accurate. Then if you don't mind, Semi-Auto, the FAL, is another strong option for the longer range engagements you find in Warzone, although I think I'd prefer something more tailored to short range and use my secondary for long range, but it deserves a mention. Almost done with the most notable weapons here. The PKM LMG has also always been a solid weapon. You sacrifice some mobility and handling to not have to worry about reloading mid-fight, and it is really solid DPS over range. Could give that a try. And finally, I caught Exclusive Ace's Warzone weapons video in which he strongly recommended the AUG with the 5.56 conversion for having some of the strongest up-close DPS without sacrificing the ability to work like a rifle at medium range. And I'll certainly co-sign that recommendation. It could take some time to unlock that ammo attachment if you don't have it, but sure, give it a go. I will say though, when loaded up with similar attachments that I like to put on the M4 to max out my bullet velocity and mag size and some other things, it starts to feel way too slow in the ADS department. Had to sacrifice some things. We'll dive into attachments in a moment. On the positive side, I should add that it uses SMG ammo. Even when you're using 5.56, that doesn't matter unless they end up changing that. So if you have a teammate using rifle ammo, you can share ammo with each other to be less likely to ever run out. Okay, for the attachments, on whatever your main all-purpose primary is going to be, I have a few things I'd strongly recommend. One being an extended mag. You'll quickly realize it's easy to run out of ammo when spraying down multiple armored targets, with each person having the health of potentially 2.5 people. You don't want to be stuck reloading mid-fight all the time. The ADS penalty is typically minimal for extended mags. Next is a suppressor. I didn't care about this at first, but the more I thought about it, sound and stealth is much more important in Warzone than normal chaotic modes, and I've become a big suppressor fan. Here I went with the middle ground to not be hurting my ADS speed too much. I'm okay without the tiny bit of extra range from Monolithic, although the lightweight suppressor hurts your range quite a bit more. You don't want that. Next, let's talk Thermal Hybrid. This is a very late unlock for the M4, so you might not have it. If you don't, then you might want to run Thermal on your secondary instead. We'll get to that. But if you do have it, I think it's great. It's going to hurt your ADS time a fair amount over a regular ACOG or red dot, but it is very handy to be able to swap from a regular red dot to a thermal. Thermals make it extremely easy to spot people from far away, and you could also combo it with the cover of a smoke grenade. We'll get to that later too. Next, I do want one of the barrels that gives bullet velocity and recoil compensation. I almost care more about those parts than the range. When you're talking very long range in Warzone, you're going to be dealing your minimum damage no matter what, but any added velocity and recoil help will make it feel that much better when hitting moving targets. In the case of the M4 here, I think the Corvus Custom has a better balance of trade-offs than the M16 Grenadier, but either would be fine. Finally, we can have some discussion here. A really cool option is using the fully loaded weapon perk. This does actually work so that when you pick up your loadout from a crate, you get max ammo, when normally you would only get the one mag of ammo with no reserves. This means you could even drop all your ammo of that type for any teammates who might want some, then pick up your fully loaded gun. But the main time it really comes in handy is if you're picking up your loadout after having died and lost all your stuff. You could be late in the game when it might not be easy to find the ammo you need, so spawning in with all of it can be very useful. If you can spare the slot, you might want to make a clone of your class, one with fully loaded and one without, so you can choose if you need the ammo or not. On the class that doesn't have fully loaded, sleight of hand and frangible wounding are pretty solid, or I would just go for any old ADS speed attachment, and I'd take the stippled grip over a stock. That'll help with the couple negatives on ADS speed we have here, and there you have a sample Warzone M4. I messed around with a couple other attachments, but landed on that in the end. And you can apply a very similar logic to the other guns I mentioned before. Most guns share very similarly themed attachments, even though they're going to look different, and you may find you need to make small adjustments, like in the case of that AUG build. I had to ditch the very slow thermal hybrid and give myself some extra ADS speed instead, because it was just way too slow with the drum mag and the barrel that I wanted. So definitely adjust your guns as needed, and feel free to discuss what you like and don't like about those ideas. For your secondary, which for me is always going to be an overkill primary, although we can come back to that, you probably want something like a sniper or a shotgun to buff up your close or long range capabilities. For most of the game, I'd say you 100% want a sniper. Maybe if you're picking up your loadout at the very end and the circle's in a close quarters area, you could have a shotgun class ready. The strongest right now when you factor in needing to break through armor has got to be the R90, the perfect balance of power and spammability in between the 680 and Origin, and I would spec it out for tight pellet spread and range like usual, but your primary should function pretty well up close. I'm all about having that sniper. I feel naked without one for long range. Having one will change your game. If you don't believe me, just listen to these testimonials. Down.
Oh shit. I just got sniped, dude.
This guy further out. Down.
Nice.
Get shit on! No! I got fucking sniped, but I killed him. I'm self-rezzing.
Oh, he's running?
Back crossing.
Yep.
Street.
Down.
Nice.
I self-rezzed and I fucking died again. Someone give me up.
I'm
Give me up, give me up,
sniped. I'm
bleeding out.
sniped.
Bad
Nope.
stuff to you.
Is that really nade shot?
Well, actually, it could be. He'd have that tag, right?
Mark broke. Killed it.
Nice.
I'm about to die, man.
I'm coming out, dude. Come on.
No.
There's no way.
I still have gulag. Bro, that's so dumb. I should be able to gulag down, bro. We got picked apart with snipes.
No, we weren't looking for them. I really don't care. It was just a funny encounter. Anyway, I think you want a sniper, and for me, that's gonna be the HDR. There is some debate to be had here, though. I know the AX50 is very popular, and even Ace, who said they were both good options, recommended the AX50 over the HDR because of the slightly better fire rate and handling properties, since they both deal the same base damage. While that is true, meaning they have the same kill zones at point blank, and they also eventually drop off to deal the same damage at extreme range, the HDR has a much better damage range profile. That's how it justifies the downsides, and that's why the HDR is considered the stronger sniper for long range, while I'd say the AX50 is the much better small map choice that you definitely gravitate to for quickscoping, that or the Kar 98K if you can be more accurate. But for Ground War and Warzone, especially with the attachments that buff range, I'm all about the HDR. Now this is not a super detailed gun guide or anything, but it seemed to me like when I was measuring going for a lower torso kill, both guns loaded up with their respective max range attachments, the HDR had roughly 50% more range over the AX50, 90 meters versus 135. There's a good chunk of range there where you will be dealing more damage with the HDR. I tried upper torso as well, where the AX50 dropped off around 140 meters, but I couldn't do a comparison because I couldn't find a range long enough for the HDR. You can't do custom ground war. Maybe that 45 meter or so difference doesn't sound like a ton to you, but I mean 50% more range is pretty dang massive, and that is a range you'll often be having sniper engagements in. And on top of the damage part, it seems like there's a bullet velocity and drop advantage to be had with the HDR as well. Once again, with their best barrels and monolithic suppressors on, I fired a shot aiming at the top of these windows, which is exactly 500 meters away. Keep in mind this is hard to measure precisely, but it looked like the AX50 took half a second to hit, and the HDR took 0.433. My measurement surely isn't perfect, but it does line up with how the HDR bullet looks like it hit a little higher on that window. Now I know that's only a 4-frame difference over 500 meters, not a huge deal, but yet another HDR advantage that goes along with the range. In most engagements, it's like you don't even have to think about bullet drop. Click on their head and they're down. No calculation needed. I can tell you subjectively, from all the time I spent in Ground War at launch, leveling up my snipers to max, the HDR felt incredible, sniping across rooftops in downtown Tovorsk and across the quarry. I think the ranges I was fighting at was exactly where the HDR excels to give many more consistent kills. Going to the AX50 felt like a major downgrade. Suddenly it was Hitmarker City, cause again, even though they have the same base damage, there's a big range difference. I remember I hated it so much I had to end up taking it into normal 6v6, where it performed much better. But I also know I'm biased. I have a much better feel for the performance of the HDR. It's what I always used for long-range sniping. Maybe you have a much better feel for the AX50, and that's totally fine. You might prefer the better handling and fire rate. If you're only going to be hitting headshots, it is better. But, I mean, don't pretend you never hit the upper chest, where the HDR will often be helping out. And either way, for me personally, I primarily only pull it out for pretty long range. I'm not trying to quickscope, so even if it's minor, the travel time that I'm used to is the more important stat to me. Well, let's move on. That's my justification. I'm an HDR fanboy, but the AX50 is totally fine too. If you wanted to go to the extreme with the headshots only thing, you could say what about the Kar98K or the Mark II, and they're also not terrible options, but I think at that point, if I'm not maxing out for power and bullet velocity to be picking people off from extreme range, I start to think, what's the point? I'm gonna be more comfortable with my primary up close, but it's up to you and how you like to use it. With all that information, let's finally talk about attachments, which will be relevant no matter what gun you choose, starting with what I already talked about, maxing out bullet velocity, and why not throw a suppressor on this thing too? I'm not trying to quickscope. Next, I think this is absolutely massive, the Presence of Mind perk, to extend the time you can hold your breath. It was never a big deal in multiplayer, but you know, it goes from like 5 seconds to a minute. Not double, not triple, a whole last minute of held breath. That may as well be forever. You're never going to be able to scope in that long. And if you somehow went the entire minute, it's only going to be 2 or 3 seconds until it resets and you can hold your breath again. I cannot stress how much I enjoy having this perk, to be able to hold my breath every time I scope in, knowing it's never going to run out. If I hit someone and they duck behind cover, I can wait for them to heal up all their armor and re-peek, knowing I'm still aimed at perfect steady headshot level. No sway to worry about, no need to let my breath go and re-steady it when he comes back out. Only the click of death that is the HDR. After trying this perk, I can't live without it. I don't think fully loaded is needed on a sniper, since the 5 bullets you start with isn't that bad, and if you find any ammo pickup or your team shares some, you're good to go. Now the optic has gotta be the most interesting slot, let's get into that. I'm a big fan of the ACOG. I like the look of the Cronin C480 because it's a good size, and according to the menu it has the highest zoom at 3.5, but the VLK is fine too, and more importantly, it has the best aim down sight properties. I may as well save a couple frames here to help counteract that suppressor and barrel. The VLK has a pretty good default reticle too, but if you have some unlocks, I like the T-pose reticle. I find the simple crosshair to be very clean. I'm not interested in having any bright color in the middle that can make it kinda hard to see at long range. But the question is, why have an ACOG when there are all these incredible zoom scopes? Well, it's to avoid the scope glint. It is such a dead giveaway of your location. If you're using a scope that has glint, you can forget about stealth if someone happens to glance in your direction when you're scoped in. And for me, that's kind of a deal breaker. Countless times I've spotted people I would have never seen because of their scope glint. I like using my scope to look around, and if it has glint, I get really self-conscious every time I'm aiming at anything, knowing I'm giving myself away. And I think having the first shot on someone who doesn't know you're there is way more valuable than the convenience of having more zoom. So as fun as that can be, I think the ACOG zoom is enough for me, and having no glint is great. If I were to use a different scope, it would be the thermal, or the thermal dual power, and that'll sort of free up your primary to maybe have a quicker aiming scope, ditch the thermal hybrid. Thermal sniper scopes are way cooler than the smaller ones on the rifles too. They're so large, you can scan a huge area and see tons of people across the map you could have never seen otherwise. It lets you see through the render distance fog. You get to watch tons of people just going about their business so far away you can't even ping them, which is very annoying. But clearly this is a very powerful scope, so I can't possibly call that a bad idea. But you do get the glint with that. Maybe one person on your team could run this scope for finding enemies more easily. Even then they may give away your squad location, and thermal can't be relied on to spot everyone because the cold-blooded perk is a thing. Well, I've told you what I think, that's why I usually go with the low zoom VLK, plus it helps with ADS time, which is very nice. Up to you to decide. To wrap up, I didn't opt for a bigger mag since my ADS time is bad enough as is, and I'm fine with the 5. The laser feels great, but the same thing about making me self-conscious about being scoped in. Not nearly as bad as scope glint, but it can be spotted from afar, so I may as well take the free ADS speed increase from a stock. That's my sniper and the explanation behind those attachments. Once again, feel free to agree and disagree with whatever. And we already mentioned the potential for other guns like a shotgun and all the other primaries that were good. Of course, there are many things you could try. You could want a shield on your back. The shield is a very interesting tool. You could use it to scout people out in late game circles, gather intel for your team without going down. There's tons of cheesy potential with that thing. But we can move on from the guns. I've given what I feel is the main meta currently. So we'll finish off with perks and equipment. Perk 1, I'm big on cold-blooded. You just saw how strong thermal is. As more and more people try thermal, I'm gonna want to stay hidden. And not only does it help you avoid that, you'll also not trigger people's high alert, which is honestly not a terrible perk too for BR, to know when you're being looked at. Way more useful than in multiplayer since people often don't shoot right away. So cold-blooded is awesome. Quick Fix is also a neat option if you get very aggressive fighting multiple people at a time. It's cool to get a kill and heal up quickly. Maybe double time is okay for general movement. EOD is multiplayer god tier, but I think a bit of a waste in Warzone. You don't get blown up that much, and if you do, armor will help you survive it. I'm sticking with cold-blooded personally. Perk 2, we already know, is Overkill. I love having my 2 guns way more than I love anything else in this slot, and that's pretty much all I have to say. Ghost can be good to avoid those late game UAVs. One person running pointsman on your team can be good for more contract cash. High alert is interesting, as I mentioned, but I'm not running a pistol or a launcher for any of those. Finally, for perk 3, because I'm using Overkill and will be frequently swapping back and forth, the swap time you get from Amped is awesome to have, but tune up for a faster revive never hurts. One person with Spotter on your team can come in clutch to be seeing equipment, and Tracker sounds very cool, but the range of the footsteps isn't exactly tailored to Warzone. You can use whatever you want, but that's why I chose what I chose. Finally, Lethal and Tactical. Here, you can really choose whatever you want. I usually have a Semtex mainly used for cleaning up someone after they're downed, or maybe sticking to a passing vehicle. A trap like a Claymore or a Betty could be fun if you know someone's following behind you, or you're gonna go full camp mode, up to you. And for tactical, lots of good options here. Snapshot can be very interesting to reveal some campers if you know a building is occupied. Maybe even the heartbeat for the same thing could be fun. Stim for a quick mid-fight heal, although it's more often you'll be healing up with armor. Stuns and flashes are never bad, and decoys can honestly, unironically, help you distract people, and might be my second choice for how fun they are. But I'm sticking with the smoke, since I am running cold-blooded and usually a thermal, there's no reason not to. It can cover your escape from somewhere, it can cover reviving a teammate, and it can be used offensively to shoot at someone with your thermals when they won't be able to easily see you back. Great overall utility to have. There you have my thoughts on Warzone class building. There is plenty of room for opinion, other guns and attachments you might absolutely love, and this may change over time as they end up adding things and making balance changes. Feel free to share your builds with everyone as well. That's all for me. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.
He's parachuted.
That might have been me picking up cash. What is going on? Is that him? That might be him, above us. Look up.
Oh.
He's gonna die, right?
Didn't
Yeah,
even think
look.
about
I have a full gas mask.
Oh, he fell. He's falling.
that.